Chapter 6. The Painted Bride. The aftermath of the attack and feeding brought subtle changes. Isolde's chambers were moved as Cassian had promised, not to another wing, but to a suite directly adjacent to his own in the east tower, connected by a hidden passage concealed behind a tapestry depicting the creation of the first vampires. The rooms were larger, more elaborately furnished, with windows that offered sweeping views of the mountains and enchantments woven into the very walls to prevent unwanted entry. "No one will reach you here," Cassian had told her during the brief tour, his manner distant, formal, as if the intimacy they had shared had never happened. "Not without my knowledge." But he had not mentioned the feeding, nor the memories she had glimpsed, nor her revelation about the woman in the portrait. It was as if he had drawn a veil across that night, determined to proceed as if nothing had changed between them. Yet everything had changed. Isolde could feel it in her blood, in her bones, in the rhythm of her heart that sometimes seemed to beat in time with a pulse that wasn't hers. She dreamed his memories now, fragments of centuries lived in shadow, moments of beauty and horror and crushing loneliness that left her gasping awake in the pre-dawn darkness. Tears on her cheeks for sorrows not her own. And the mark on her throat, the puncture wounds from his feeding, had not completely healed as she had expected. Instead, they had faded to two small silver crescents, barely visible except when caught by direct light, when they seemed to shimmer with an inner luminescence. She touched them often, a reminder that what had passed between them had been real, not a fevered dream born of fear and adrenaline. For a week after the attack, Cassian had kept his distance, appearing only briefly to inquire after her comfort or to deliver books he thought might interest her. Their conversations were polite, careful, neither acknowledging the current that hummed between them whenever they were in the same room. Then, on the 8th day, a formal invitation arrived, delivered by a servant Isolde had never seen before, a tall, willowy vampiress with hair like spun silver and eyes the colour of Arctic ice. "Lady Isolde Marin," the vampiress intoned, her voice musical but cold. "By decree of His Eternal Majesty, King Renatus Valenhart, your presence is required at the Winter Gala, to be held 3 nights hence at the Palace of Flameglass. As consort to Prince Cassian, you will be formally presented to the court and acknowledged by the crown." The servant, if that's what she was, handed Isolde a scroll sealed with the same blood-red wax as the previous summons, then added, "The Mistress of Appearances will attend you tomorrow to begin preparations. You are expected to comply fully with her instructions." Before Isolde could respond, the vampiress bowed slightly and departed, leaving her alone with the sealed invitation and a growing sense of unease. She found Cassian in the library later that evening, standing before the fire, a book open in his hands, though his eyes were fixed on the flames. "I've been summoned to the Winter Gala," she said without preamble. He didn't look up. "I know. I received the same command." "Command," she repeated, "not invitation." His mouth quirked in a humourless smile. "My father rarely invites. He summons, commands, decrees, the language of absolute power. And we must obey." Now he did look at her, his garnet eyes reflecting the firelight. "We must appear to obey, which in politics amounts to the same thing." "What is this gala?" she asked, moving deeper into the library, drawn to the warmth of the fire and the man who stood before it, despite his deliberate distance. "Another court function like the one before." "Similar, but with a different purpose," he replied, closing his book and setting it aside. The Winter Court was diplomatic, a gathering of all noble houses to renew alliances, settle disputes, demonstrate loyalty to the crown. The gala is more ceremonial, a celebration of the Valenhart line specifically. And this year, it seems, a formal acknowledgement of my choice of consort. The way he said my choice made it clear that it had been anything but. "Why now?" Isolde asked. We've been bound for nearly 2 months. Why this sudden interest in acknowledging me?" Cassian's expression tightened. "Because rumours have reached the court about what happened here, about Garvith's attack, and how I responded. About—" He hesitated, then finished. "About the feeding." She felt heat rise to her cheeks at the memory, but kept her voice steady. "How could they know about that? There was no one else present." "The castle has eyes and ears beyond the obvious," he said grimly, "and vampires have senses that can detect changes." "What kind of changes?" He glanced away, his posture stiffening. "The bond between us has strengthened. It's detectable to those with the ability to sense such things. My father would have been informed immediately." "And that's significant enough to warrant a formal presentation?" "It suggests permanence," Cassian said, still not looking at her. "A consort is one thing, temporary, replaceable. A bonded mate is another." The distinction made her heart skip a beat. "Is that what I am now? Your mate?" His jaw tightened. "In vampire tradition, a mate is chosen through a process far more complex and binding than what we have undergone. But to the court, the strengthened bond suggests movement in that direction." "And is that accurate?" she pressed, taking another step closer to him. "Are we moving in that direction, Cassian?" Now he did meet her eyes, his own unreadable. "What happened between us was unplanned. A response to crisis, not a deliberate choice." The words stung more than they should have. "I remember it differently," she said quietly. "I remember offering, and you accepting. Choice was very much involved." "Isolde," he began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed startlingly human. "The situation is complicated. The feeding, it creates bonds that feel real, that seem profound but are largely biological, chemical. A survival mechanism to ensure the vampire can feed again, and the human will submit willingly." "Is that what you believe?" she asked, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "That what I feel, what I experienced, is just some evolutionary trick to make me a more compliant food source?" "What I believe is irrelevant," he replied, his voice hardening. "What matters is that my father has decided to acknowledge you formally, which means you will be subject to even greater scrutiny than before. The mistress of appearances will prepare you for the gala. I suggest you cooperate fully. The consequences of refusing would be unpleasant." "For whom?" she challenged. "For me, or for you?" His expression darkened. "For both of us. The court is not a place for defiance, Isolde. Not the open kind, at least." She considered this, understanding that there was more he wasn't saying, political undercurrents she couldn't fully grasp, dangers beyond the obvious. "And what will be expected of me at this gala, besides looking appropriately decorative?" "Obedience," he said bluntly. "Deference to the crown. Acknowledgement of your place in the hierarchy. Bound to me, but subject to the king's authority. And—" he hesitated, then added, "acceptance of certain traditions that may seem strange or even offensive to you." "What traditions?" But he was already turning away, moving toward the door with the fluid grace that still startled her sometimes, a reminder of his inhumanity. "The mistress will explain tomorrow. Rest well, Isolde. The next days will be taxing." With that he was gone, leaving her alone with the fire and a growing sense that she was being maneuvered like a piece on a chessboard, not just by Cassian, but by forces she was only beginning to understand. The mistress of appearances arrived the next morning with an entourage of 5, 3 vampiresses of varying ages and 2 human women whose eyes held the vacant look of those under thrall. She introduced herself as Lixa, a name whispered with both reverence and fear in the vampire court, according to Edith's nervous murmurs, as she helped Isolde dress for the appointment. Lixa herself was a vision of controlled perfection, tall and willowy with skin so pale it seemed to glow from within, hair the colour of midnight falling in a straight curtain to her waist, and eyes of such a deep blue they appeared nearly black. She wore a gown of charcoal silk that moved like smoke around her body, and her only adornment was a silver chain around her throat, from which hung a small vial of what could only be blood. "Lady Maren," she said, her voice like velvet over steel, "I am here to prepare you for the winter gala. The process will take 3 days. Today we begin with measurements and preliminary assessments. Tomorrow we will sculpt. The final day will be devoted to the finishing touches." "Sculpt," Isolde repeated, unsettled by the term. Lixa's smile was thin, barely disturbing the perfect symmetry of her face. "A figure of speech, my lady. We will shape your appearance to meet the expectations of the court. No actual chisels will be involved." Somehow this did little to reassure her. What followed was a process both invasive and impersonal. Isolde was made to stand in the centre of her chambers, while the attendants moved around her, measuring every aspect of her form with silver ribbons marked with strange symbols. Lixa observed, occasionally making notes in a small book bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. "Smaller than expected," she remarked at one point, "but well proportioned. The waist will need significant shaping, of course, and the pallor is all wrong. Too much sun, too much health. We'll correct that." "I didn't realize health was a flaw to be corrected," Isolde said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Lixa looked up from her notes, those midnight eyes assessing Isolde with new interest. "In vampire society, my lady, mortal vitality is considered rustic, charming in a pastoral setting perhaps, but inappropriate for court. You will be presented as Prince Cassian's consort. Your appearance must reflect his status, his taste, his preferences." There was something in the way she said preferences that raised the hair on Isolde's arms. And what would those be? "Historically?" Lixa's smile deepened, taking on a cruel edge. "Tragic beauty, doomed grace, the ethereal quality of something not long for this world." She circled Isolde slowly, appraisingly. "A challenge with your particular robustness. But not impossible." The assessment continued for hours, every aspect of Isolde's appearance catalogued and critiqued with clinical detachment. Her hair was declared acceptable in texture but too vibrant in colour. Her eyes were adequately expressive but lacking the necessary melancholy. Her skin was offensively healthy and would require significant treatment to achieve the desired pallor. By the time Lixa and her attendants finally departed, Isolde felt less like a person and more like a canvas to be painted over, a doll to be dressed according to someone else's vision. It was humiliating, dehumanizing, and it awakened a slow-burning anger that she carefully banked, knowing that open defiance would only make her situation more difficult. But as she stood at her window watching the eternal twilight that shrouded Valenhart Castle, she made a silent promise to herself. She would play the role they demanded, wear the costumes they provided, speak the words they scripted. But beneath it all, she would remain herself. Isolde Maren, not just Cassian's consort, not just a decorative accessory to vampire politics, but a woman with her own mind, her own will, her own heart. A heart that, despite all logic and self-preservation, was increasingly drawn to the very being who had brought her into this beautiful, terrible world of immortal games and ancient hungers. The second day of preparation was worse. Lixa arrived with her entourage plus 3 additional attendants, vampire males this time, their movements precise and professional as they set up what appeared to be an artist's studio in Isolde's chambers. Easels, paints, brushes, and an array of powders, oils and tinctures in glass vials were arranged on tables brought specifically for the purpose. "Today we create the illusion," Lixa announced. "The court expects a certain aesthetic from Prince Cassian's consort. We will provide it." What followed was a process as thorough as it was uncomfortable. Isolde was stripped to her undergarments, her skin scrubbed with astringent solutions that left it raw and tingling, then coated with a paste made from ground moonstone and some herb she didn't recognize, which dried to a chalky film before being buffed away to reveal skin, now unnaturally pale, almost luminescent. Her hair was washed with a solution that leached some of the colour from it, leaving it a darker, more sombre shade of brown, then dried and arranged in elaborate coils that would frame the face appropriately, according to one of the male attendants. But it was the painting that truly disturbed her. One of the vampiresses approached with a palette of pigments unlike any Isolde had seen before, colours that seemed to shift and move in the light, some so dark they appeared to absorb rather than reflect illumination, others so bright they hurt the eye to look upon directly. "Hold still," the vampiress instructed. "This must be precise." With brushes finer than a single hair, she began to apply the pigments to Isolde's face, around her eyes, across her cheekbones, along the curve of her jaw. Each stroke was deliberate, measured, guided by Lixa's occasional murmured corrections. "More shadow at the temples," she would say, "deeper hollows beneath the cheekbones. The eyes should appear larger, more haunted. Think of twilight just before full dark." Isolde sat motionless through it all, watching in a mirror held by one of the human attendants as her face was transformed stroke by stroke into something both more and less than herself, a ethereal beauty with eyes that seemed to contain depths of sorrow she had never experienced, cheekbones that could cut glass, and lips the exact colour of fresh blood. It was only when they began painting symbols on her body, at her throat, her collarbones, the inside of her wrists, that she finally spoke. "What are these?" she asked as a complex design took shape just above her heart, silver paint against her now pale skin. "Tradition," Lixa replied without looking up from her notes. "Ancient symbols of bond and belonging. This one," she gestured to the design being painted on Isolde's chest, "signifies fertility, though it is largely ceremonial now. Few vampire mortal pairings produce offspring." Isolde stared at the symbol, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. "I'm being painted as... what? A potential broodmare?" Lixa's eyes flicked to hers, cold with warning. "You are being prepared as tradition demands, Lady Marin. These symbols have been painted on consorts for millennia. They honour the potential of the pairing, however unlikely its fulfillment." "Does Cassian know about this?" Isolde demanded, the anger she had banked now flaring despite her resolve to remain compliant. "The prince is aware of all court traditions," Lixa said dismissively. "Now, please remain still. The paint must dry properly before we can proceed to the next stage." Isolde bit back further protest, recognizing the futility of arguing with someone who viewed her as little more than a living canvas. But her mind raced with questions and suspicions about the true purpose of this elaborate preparation. The rest of the day passed in a blur of discomfort and indignity. She was measured for a gown that, based on the sketches she glimpsed, would be more revealing than anything she had ever worn. Her hands and feet were buffed, painted, adorned with tiny jewels set directly into the paint at her cuticles. Her ears were pierced with silver needles, then fitted with drops of what Lixa called blood crystal, gems that pulsed faintly with their own inner light, warm against her skin. By the time the attendants finally departed, leaving her to rest before the final day of preparation, Isolde felt like a stranger in her own body, transformed into something beautiful but alien, a work of art rather than a woman. She slept fitfully that night, dreaming of being slowly encased in glass, preserved but untouchable, viewed but never heard, a perfect silent trophy in a collection of beautiful things. The third day brought the gown. It was a creation of impossible beauty and equally impossible restriction. Blood-red velvet so dark it appeared black in certain lights, with a bodice that clung to her torso like a second skin, a waist cinched to painful narrowness by an internal structure of what Lixa called dragon bone, though Isolde doubted actual dragons were involved. and a skirt that flared dramatically from hip to floor, trailing behind her in a sweep of fabric that whispered against the stone like secrets shared in darkness. The neckline was shockingly revealing, a deep V that plunged nearly to her navel, exposing the silver fertility symbol painted on her chest for all to see. The back was equally bare, the velvet resuming just above the base of her spine. Sleeves of black lace fell from shoulder to wrist, so delicate they seemed like smoke given form. As they dressed her, arranging the gown with meticulous care, Isolde caught glimpses of herself in the full-length mirror that had been brought for the occasion. The transformation was complete. She no longer looked human, or at least not ordinarily so. She appeared as something between mortal and vampire, a creature of twilight with skin like moonlight, eyes deepened to mysterious shadows by the paint around them, and a mouth that promised blood and darkness. It was only when one of the attendants placed a final accessory, a high collar of stiffened black lace that framed her face like the petals of some deadly flower, that Isolde recognized what they had done. She had seen this before, this exact configuration of gown, hairstyle, and adornment, in a portrait hanging in one of Valenhart Castle's many galleries, a portrait of a woman with Cassian's garnet eyes and the king's imperious bearing, Lady Brielle Valenhart, Cassian's mother, long dead if the date on the portrait was accurate, nearly 2 centuries gone. "Why am I dressed like her?" Isolde asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lixer, who had been supervising the final adjustments to the gown, looked up sharply. "I beg your pardon." "Lady Brielle," Isolde said more firmly now, "Cassian's mother. This is her gown, her style. Why am I being presented as her mirror image?" A flicker of something, respect, perhaps, or surprise, crossed Lixer's perfect features. "You are observant, Lady Marin, more so than I expected. Answer the question." Lixer's lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "You are being presented as tradition demands. If that tradition recalls certain historical figures, it is merely coincidence." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Nothing in Vampire Court was coincidence. Every detail, every symbol, every choice of color or style was deliberate, layered with meaning, designed to convey messages that might take centuries to fully unfold. Isolde was being dressed not just as Cassian's consort, but as a deliberate evocation of his mother, a woman who, if court gossip was to be believed, had been the subject of complex and bitter disputes between Cassian and his father. She was being used as a chess piece in a game she didn't fully understand, and Cassian had allowed it, perhaps even orchestrated it. The thought made her stomach tighten with a mixture of anger and hurt, but she forced herself to remain composed, to reveal nothing as Lixer and her attendants made their final adjustments, applied the last touches of paint, arranged the last curl of her hair. "Perfect," Lixer declared finally, stepping back to survey her creation. "The prince will be pleased. And the court." Her midnight eyes gleamed with anticipation. "The court will be most entertained." Cassian was waiting at the base of the grand staircase when Isolde descended, guided by 2 of Lixer's attendants, who ensured that the train of her gown fell just so that her posture remained painfully erect, that her expression conveyed the precise mixture of ethereal beauty and untouchable mystery that had been so carefully crafted. He wore formal attire of midnight blue so dark it appeared black except when caught by direct light, a fitted jacket embroidered with silver thread at collar and cuffs, trousers of the same fabric, and boots that gleamed like polished obsidian. A chain of silver links hung across his chest, each link set with a small blood-red stone that matched his eyes exactly. Those eyes widened slightly when he saw her, the only indication that her appearance had made any impression. His face remained impassive, controlled, though something flickered in his gaze that might have been regret, or perhaps resignation. "Isolde," he said, offering his arm as she reached the bottom of the stairs. "You look like your mother," she finished for him, keeping her voice low but making no effort to hide her anger. Was that your idea? Or your father's? A muscle in his jaw tightened. Neither, he said after a moment. It is tradition. All consorts are presented in a manner that echoes the matriarch of the house they enter. And it's mere coincidence that I'm being paraded before the court as the mirror image of a woman over whose memory you and your father still battle, she asked, taking his arm with as much grace as she could muster, conscious of the attendants still hovering nearby. His eyes met hers directly, something like respect mingling with the regret in their depths. No, he admitted. Not coincidence. Politics. A message my father will understand, though I doubt you were told its full meaning. Then tell me, she said as they began to walk toward the castle entrance, where a carriage waited to take them to the Palace of Flameglass. What message am I carrying, painted and dressed like this? Cassian was silent until they had left the attendants behind, until they were seated in the carriage, another massive conveyance of black lacquer and silver, similar to the one that had taken them to the winter court. Only then, as the carriage began to move, drawn by those unnatural horses through the eternal twilight, did he speak. My mother was human, he said, his voice low but clear. A consort like you chosen for political reasons from a village under Valenhart protection. She was beautiful, intelligent, strong-willed, qualities my father found amusing in a temporary diversion. Isolde listened in silence, understanding that he was finally sharing a piece of the history he had so carefully guarded. But she was more than he expected, Cassian continued, more than anyone expected. She didn't submit as other consorts had. She changed him. For a time. His expression darkened. Then she bore me, and the change proved temporary. He returned to his true nature, and she paid the price. He killed her, Isolde asked, her anger giving way to horror. Not directly, Cassian replied, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape. But he might as well have. He took too much too often. Weakened her beyond recovery. She died when I was still a child, at least by vampire reckoning. The carriage jolted over a rough patch in the road, but neither of them seemed to notice, both caught in the gravity of the conversation. By dressing you as she was dressed, Cassian said after a moment, by painting you with the same symbols, presenting you in the same manner. I am reminding my father of what he destroyed, and warning him that I will not allow history to repeat itself. Isolde absorbed this, understanding better now why he had kept his distance, why he had been so careful not to take too much from her despite the hunger she knew tormented him. You could have told me, she said finally, instead of letting me be manipulated like this, used as a symbol without understanding what I symbolize. Would you have agreed if I had? He asked, looking at her directly now. Would you have willingly stepped into this role, knowing what it represents? She considered the question honestly. I don't know, she admitted, but I deserved the choice. Yes, he said after a long moment. You did. And for denying you that, I apologize. The sincerity in his voice, the regret in his eyes softened her anger, not eliminating it but tempering it with understanding. He was navigating waters far deeper and more treacherous than she had realized, playing a game whose rules had been established centuries before her birth. So what happens now, she asked, as the carriage approached what could only be the Palace of Flameglass, a structure that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal, black as night, but shot through with veins of fire that pulsed like a living heartbeat. What is expected of me at this gala, beyond looking like your mother's ghost? Dignity, he replied. Composure. Silent strength in the face of curiosity that will border on cruelty. The court will watch you, whisper about you, attempt to provoke reactions they can use against you, against us. And I am to simply endure it? She asked, her spine stiffening at the thought. Endure, yes, he said, but not submit. There is a difference. One my mother understood well. The carriage came to a stop before the palace entrance, a towering archway of crystal that flickered with inner fire, casting strange, shifting shadows across the faces of the vampire nobles who were arriving from all directions, some in carriages like theirs, others on horseback, still others simply materializing from the mist that swirled at the base of the crystal mountain. "One last thing," Cassian said as a footman approached to open the carriage door. "No matter what happens tonight, remember that you are under my protection. No harm will come to you while I draw breath." The intensity in his voice, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, sent a shiver through Isolde that had nothing to do with the chill in the air. For all his distance, all his careful control, in this moment he seemed ready to tear apart anyone who threatened her. "I'm not afraid," she said, and was surprised to realize it was true. The anger remained, as did the sense of being used, but fear had been replaced by a strange, calm determination to face whatever the night might bring. His mouth curved in what might almost have been a smile. "No," he said. "You rarely are. It's one of the things I—" He broke off, jaw tightening as if he'd said more than he intended. Before she could press him on what he'd been about to say, the carriage door opened and they were swept into the glittering, dangerous world of the Winter Gala. The Palace of Flameglass was aptly named. Its interior was a cathedral of black crystal, the walls, floor, and vaulted ceiling all formed from the same strange material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, except for the veins of fire that ran through it like the circulatory system of some vast, otherworldly being. These veins pulsed with a rhythm that Isolde could feel in her bones, a slow, hypnotic beat that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat the longer she remained within the palace walls. The overall effect was both beautiful and disorienting. A space that seemed to breathe, to live, to watch with eyes invisible but felt. The great hall where the gala was being held was the heart of this crystal organism, a vast chamber with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow, the fire veins converging here in complex patterns that cast the assembled vampires in an eerie, flickering light. And there were hundreds of them, more than Isolde had seen at the Winter Court. All beautiful, all deadly, all watching with predatory interest as she entered on Cassian's arm. A hush fell over the gathering as they were announced. His Royal Highness, Prince Cassian Valenhart, and his consort, Lady Isolde Marin. All eyes turning to assess the mortal woman dressed as the echo of a dead queen. Isolde felt the weight of their gazes like a physical pressure, but she kept her head high, her expression composed, her steps measured as Cassian led her deeper into the hall. She had been prepared for scrutiny, for whispers, for the mix of curiosity and disdain that mortals typically faced in vampire society. What she hadn't expected was the shock that registered on many faces, the widened eyes, the sharp intakes of unnecessary breath. Some of the older vampires actually backed away as she passed, making signs with their hands that might have been warding gestures. "They're afraid," she murmured to Cassian, keeping her voice low enough that only he would hear. "Why?" "Not fear," he corrected, equally quiet. "Recognition. Many of them knew my mother, served her even. The resemblance is unsettling to them. But I don't look like her," Isolde pointed out. "Not naturally. Only with all this." She gestured subtly to the paint, the gown, the elaborate styling. "It's not about physical resemblance," Cassian replied. "It's about essence, energy, the way you move, the way you hold yourself. Even painted and styled, most mortals would appear cowed in this setting. You don't. Neither did she." Before Isolde could respond, they reached the dais where King Renatus sat on a throne of crystal and bone, watching their approach with eyes like midwinter midnight. Beside him, the Queen's throne stood empty. She had not been seen at court in decades, according to rumours Isolde had overheard among the servants. Cassian bowed with perfect grace, the movement formal but containing the minimum deference required. Isolde followed his example, sinking into a curtsy that acknowledged the king's position without suggesting her own subservience. "Rise," Renatus commanded, his voice carrying easily through the hushed hall. "Let us see what my son has brought to court this time." Isolde straightened, meeting the king's gaze directly as protocol demanded. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, then narrowed in what might have been anger or perhaps simple calculation. "Interesting choice, Cassian," he said, his tone casual but underlined with something sharper. "One might almost think you were making a point." "Tradition demands certain presentations, Father," Cassian replied smoothly. "I merely follow the customs you yourself have always insisted upon." A ripple of tension passed through the court at this exchange, subtle but palpable. Isolde sensed the undercurrents, years, perhaps centuries of conflict distilled into a few seemingly innocuous words. Renatus's gaze shifted to her, cold and assessing. "And you, Lady Marin, how do you find life among our kind? Better than your village, I trust?" It was a trap, a question designed to force her either to demean her former life or to insult her current situation. But Isolde had been prepared for such tactics by her reading, by Cassian's warnings, by her own growing understanding of vampire politics. "Different, Your Majesty," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "Each world has its beauties and its terrors. I am still learning to navigate both in this one." Renatus's eyebrows rose slightly. Surprise, perhaps, at her diplomatic handling of the question. "Indeed," he said after a moment. "Navigation is a valuable skill, one my son has always excelled at." His eyes flicked to Cassian. "Though his choice of destination sometimes perplexes." "The journey matters more than the destination, Father," Cassian responded, the words outwardly respectful but carrying an undertone of challenge. "As you yourself once taught me." The king's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Lessons change as students evolve," he said, "or fail to." He waved a hand dismissively. "Go. Enjoy the festivities. We will speak more privately later." It was a dismissal, and Cassian accepted it with another precise bow, his hand guiding Isolde away from the dais and back into the crowd that parted before them like water around stone. "Well done," he murmured once they were beyond the king's immediate hearing. "Few navigate my father's verbal traps so deftly on first encounter." "I've had practice with manipulative authority figures," she replied, thinking of the village elder who had ruled her former home with a combination of religious fervour and personal ambition. Though none quite so eternal. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Eternity merely provides more time to perfect one's manipulations," he said, "not necessarily more skill in applying them." They moved through the gathering, accepting greetings, exchanging formal pleasantries, always aware of the eyes that followed them, the whispers that rose in their wake. Many of the nobles Isolde had met at the winter court were present, including Duchess Meredith, who watched their progress with cold assessment, and Lord Everick, whose amber eyes gleamed with something like delight at the spectacle they presented. Music began, an orchestra of pale, ethereal figures playing instruments that seemed crafted from crystal and bone, producing sounds both beautiful and slightly discordant, melodies that shifted between major and minor keys with unsettling frequency. Couples moved onto the dance floor, a circle of polished obsidian at the center of the hall, illuminated by fire veins that pulsed in time with the music. Their movements were too graceful to be fully human, too fluid, as if gravity affected them differently than it did mortals. "We are expected to join them," Cassian said, his hand still resting lightly at the small of her back. "The first dance is traditionally reserved for the highest-ranking couples. As the king's heir, we must participate." Isolde hesitated, uncertain of her ability to match the supernatural grace of the vampire dancers. "I don't know the steps," she admitted. "Follow my lead," he replied, guiding her toward the edge of the circle. "The music will tell you what to do. It's enchanted to ease the dance for those unaccustomed to our ways." Before she could question this further, they had reached the dance floor and Cassian turned to face her, one hand extended in formal invitation. She placed her hand in his, aware of the coolness of his skin, the controlled strength in his fingers as they closed around hers. His other hand settled at her waist, drawing her closer, not inappropriately so, but near enough that she could feel the solid presence of him, could catch the scent that was uniquely his, like winter frost and ancient forests, and something darker, richer, that made her pulse quicken. Then they were moving, gliding across the obsidian floor with a grace she knew was not entirely her own. The music seemed to flow into her, guiding her steps, making her body respond, as if she had danced these patterns 100 times before. Cassian led with confidence, but also with a gentleness she hadn't expected, his hand at her waist, supporting rather than directing, his eyes never leaving hers as they moved together in perfect synchronization. "The court is watching," he murmured as they turned, their bodies separating briefly before coming together again, closer than before. "Measuring your grace, your poise, your effect on me." "And what effect is that?" she asked, emboldened by the intimacy of the dance, by the way his eyes seemed to darken as they moved together. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You know what effect," he said, his voice lowering to something near a growl. "You feel it, just as I do. The bond, drawing us together, the hunger, growing with each touch." Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading outward, making her skin flush beneath the pallor paint had created. "You've been avoiding me," she said, not a question but a statement. "Since the feeding. Since I saw your memories." His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "It was unexpected. Unprecedented. I needed time to understand what happened, what it means. And do you? Understand?" The dance brought them together again, his body against hers for a brief, electric moment before the pattern required separation. "No," he admitted, "but I understand enough to know that it should not have been possible, that you should not have been able to see what you saw." "But I did see it," she insisted. "I saw her. The woman from the portrait. I saw her dying in your arms. I felt your grief, your guilt." Cassian's expression darkened, his movements becoming more controlled, more precise, as if the physical discipline of the dance was necessary to maintain his emotional composure. "That memory is mine," he said, the words clipped. "Not yours to witness, not yours to judge." "I'm not judging," Isolde said, softening her tone. "I'm trying to understand. Who was she, Cassian? What happened to her?" The music changed, the tempo slowing, becoming more intimate, more haunting. Cassian drew her closer, his mouth near her ear as they moved in a slower, more deliberate pattern. "Her name was Ilara," he said finally, the name like a sigh against her skin. "She was everything. And I destroyed her, as I will destroy you if you continue on this path." "I don't believe that," Isolde said, her hand tightening on his shoulder. "I saw your memory, felt your grief. You loved her. You mourned her. That's not destruction, it's—" "Enough," he interrupted, his voice sharp despite its quietness. "This is neither the time nor the place for such discussions. The court has eyes and ears everywhere, and there are those who would use any perceived weakness against us." As if to emphasize his point, another couple danced close to them, Lord Everick and a vampiress Isolde didn't recognize, both watching with undisguised interest. "Prince Cassian," Everick greeted, his voice pitched to carry no further than their small circle. "Your consort outshines every immortal beauty here tonight. One might almost believe she belongs among us." It was both compliment and insult, suggestion and threat. Cassian's arm tightened protectively around Isolde's waist. "Lord Everick," he acknowledged coolly. I see you've found a partner willing to overlook your many shortcomings. How fortunate for you." Everic laughed, the sound like glass breaking. "Always so sharp, my prince. But then, sharp edges draw blood more easily, don't they?" His amber eyes shifted to Isolde, travelling over her with a hunger that had nothing to do with feeding and everything to do with possession. "Tell me, Lady Maren, has our prince shown you all his sharp edges yet? Or is he still pretending to be something other than what he is?" Before Isolde could respond, Cassian stepped slightly in front of her, his body language shifting from formal dancer to predator in an instant. "Careful, Everic," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "Even in this setting, there are lines one does not cross." "But crossing lines is what makes eternity bearable, isn't it?" Everic countered, still smiling that sharp, dangerous smile. "Ask your lovely consort if she agrees. She seems the type to appreciate a certain disregard for boundaries." It was a deliberate provocation, designed to force a response that would create a scene, draw attention, perhaps even lead to the kind of confrontation that would require the king's intervention. Isolde felt Cassian's muscles tense beneath her hand, saw the dangerous flash in his eyes that suggested he was close to losing the iron control he maintained. She needed to diffuse the situation, to redirect the conversation before it escalated further. "Lord Everic," she said, stepping forward to place herself beside Cassian rather than behind him. "You seem very concerned with boundaries for someone who just violated several by speaking to me as if I were not present. Is it common practice in vampire society to discuss someone as if they were an object rather than a person? Or is that a particular talent of yours?" Everic's eyes widened briefly, surprise flickering across his features before being replaced by a different kind of interest, sharper, more calculating. "Oh, she has fangs of her own, this one," he said to Cassian, though his eyes remained fixed on Isolde. "No wonder you're so protective." "My consort speaks for herself," Cassian replied, his tone lighter now, almost amused. "As you've discovered. Perhaps next time you'll address her directly, rather than speaking about her as if she were a particularly interesting specimen in a collection." "Next time," Everic repeated, inclining his head slightly in acknowledgement. "I look forward to it." He turned his attention fully to Isolde. "Lady Maren, it has been illuminating. Until we meet again." With that, he and his partner danced away, disappearing into the crowd of swirling couples. "That was dangerous," Cassian murmured as they resumed their own dance, though his movements were more controlled now, his body held with a tension that hadn't been present before. "Everic is not to be trifled with." "Neither am I," Isolde replied, lifting her chin slightly. "I won't be spoken about, as if I'm not present, not even in vampire court." To her surprise, something like pride flickered in his eyes. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you will. Just be careful." Everic's interest is never casual and rarely benign. "What does he want?" she asked as they turned, the dance pattern bringing them closer to the edge of the floor where the crowd was thinner. "From you?" Cassian's expression darkened. "The same thing all predators want from beautiful prey. To possess, to consume, to destroy, eventually." "And from you?" His mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "To see me fall, to witness my carefully constructed control shatter, to use what I value against me." The implications of his words, that he valued her, that Everic had recognized this and would use it to provoke him, sent a complex mixture of emotions through Isolde. Warmth at the suggestion that she mattered to Cassian, fear at the danger this placed her in, and a strange, fierce determination to protect him as he sought to protect her. The music reached a crescendo, then faded, signaling the end of the dance. Couples separated, bowing to each other before leaving the floor to make way for the next set of dancers. Cassian's hand remained at the small of her back as he guided her away from the dance floor, through the crowd toward one of the crystal archways that led to a balcony overlooking the palace grounds. "Air," he explained when she glanced at him questioningly. "The atmosphere in there is oppressive." It wasn't just the atmosphere she knew. It was the watchful eyes, the calculating minds, the political undercurrents that threatened to drown them both. He was seeking a moment of respite, a brief escape from the performance they were both engaged in. The balcony was deserted, possibly because the air outside was bitterly cold, a wind from the mountains carrying the scent of snow and pine. Isolde shivered slightly despite the warmth of the velvet gown, and Cassian immediately removed his jacket, draping it around her shoulders with a gentleness that belied his earlier tension. "Thank you," she said, drawing the fabric closer around her. It carried his scent, and she found herself inhaling deeply, taking comfort in that connection. Cassian moved to the balcony's edge, his hands resting on the crystal railing as he gazed out at the landscape below. A valley shrouded in mist, mountains rising beyond, like sentinels guarding the boundaries of the vampire realm. "I should have warned you," he said after a moment, his voice low but clear. "About the presentation, about what it would entail, about how you would be used." "Yes," she agreed. "You should have." He turned to look at her, his expression more open than she had seen it since the night of the feeding. "I am unaccustomed to considering the feelings of others," he admitted. "Centuries of isolation have made me selfish, in certain ways. It did not occur to me that you might object to being part of a strategy you didn't understand." It was as close to an apology as she had ever heard from him, and it softened something in her chest that had been hardened by anger and hurt. "I understand now," she said. "About your mother. About the message you're sending to your father. I just wish you had trusted me enough to explain it beforehand." "Trust," he repeated, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. "It has been a long time since I trusted anyone, Isolde. Longer still, since anyone deserved that trust." "And now?" she asked, taking a step closer to him, the wind catching at her skirts, making them billow like dark flames around her legs. "Do I deserve your trust, Cassian?" He studied her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the pulsing fire veins of the crystal palace, turning the garnet to living flame. "You have seen my memories," he said finally. "You have felt my grief, my guilt. You know more of me than anyone has in centuries, and still you stand before me, unafraid." "Not unafraid," she corrected, "but willing to face the fear, to understand what lies beneath it." Another step brought her close enough to reach out, to place her hand on his chest where, beneath layers of fabric and centuries of carefully constructed defenses, a heartbeat with unnatural slowness. "Tell me the truth," she said softly. "All of it. Not just what happened to Alara, but why you chose me. Why the binding? Why all of this?" Cassian's hand rose to cover hers, cool against her warmth, strong yet gentle. "The truth," he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure I remember what that is anymore. I've lived so long with secrets, with half-truths, with the necessary lies of politics and survival." "Try," she urged. "For me. For us." He hesitated, his eyes searching hers as if looking for something he both hoped and feared to find. Then, with a gentleness that startled her, he raised his other hand to her face, his fingers brushing her cheek in a touch so light it might have been imagined. "I chose you," he began, his voice low and intense, "because when I saw you in that crowd, when our eyes met, I felt something I had not felt in centuries. A recognition. A possibility. As if fate had placed you there, exactly where I would find you, exactly when I needed to." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her, and it made her heart race, her breath catch in her throat. "Needed to for what?" she asked. His fingers traced the curve of her cheek, his touch featherlight against the paint that had transformed her features. "To remember what it feels like to care," he said. "To want something beyond power, beyond survival, to have a reason to continue this endless existence. The admission hung between them, charged with meaning, with the weight of centuries of loneliness, of careful isolation now crumbling beneath the simple truth of connection. Isolde leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "And do you?" she asked. "Care?" For answer, he moved closer, his hand sliding from her cheek to the nape of her neck, cradling her head with a tenderness that made her ache. "More than is safe," he murmured, "for either of us." His gaze dropped to her mouth, and she knew he was going to kiss her, here, on this crystal balcony with the wind swirling around them, far from the watchful eyes of the court, but still within the dangerous orbit of vampire politics. She wanted it, she realized. Wanted his mouth on hers, wanted the connection that had been growing between them since the feeding to solidify, to become something acknowledged rather than merely felt. He must have seen the desire in her eyes, felt it in the quickening of her pulse beneath his hand, for he lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She didn't. His lips were a breath away from hers when thunder cracked overhead, sudden, sharp, startling them both. Cassian pulled back, his expression shifting from desire to alertness in an instant. "Storm," he said, glancing at the sky that had darkened further, clouds gathering with unnatural speed. "We should return inside." But Isolde knew it wasn't just the threat of rain that had caused him to withdraw. It was the moment itself, too revealing, too honest, too dangerous in its implications. "Cassian," she began, reaching for him, but he was already moving away, retrieving his jacket from her shoulders with gentle efficiency. "The gala will continue for hours yet," he said, his voice returning to its usual controlled neutrality. "We should rejoin the court before our absence is noted and commented upon." The mask was back in place, the prince, the heir, the creature of perfect control and political calculation. But Isolde had seen beneath it now, had glimpsed the man behind the vampire, the heart behind the hunger. And she would not forget. Chapter 7. The Witch of Red Thorns. For 3 nights after the winter gala, Isolde dreamed of thorns. They emerged from the castle stones, writhing like living things, blooming with black roses whose petals fell like droplets of ink. They wound up the staircases, coiled around bedposts, climbed the walls in sinuous patterns that spelled words in a language she couldn't read but somehow understood. Seek, find, know. Each morning she woke with the taste of iron on her tongue and the certainty that something was calling her, something beyond the castle walls, something ancient and dangerous and necessary. On the 4th night, the dream changed. She found herself walking through a forest unlike any she had ever seen, trees with bark like polished obsidian, branches reaching up toward a sky where 3 moons hung impossibly close. The path beneath her feet was lined with stones that pulsed with faint luminescence, guiding her deeper into the woods. And then she came to a clearing where the trees bled red sap from wounds in their trunks, where the grass was black as night, where a figure waited in a cloak of shadow. "Come," the figure said, its voice neither male nor female, but something in between, something old and knowing. "Come, daughter of blood and bone. Come and learn what he cannot tell you." As Isolde approached, the figure lifted its head, revealing a face of terrible beauty, ageless, perfect except for eyes that swirled with colours no human eyes should contain. "Who are you?" Isolde asked, her voice echoing strangely in the unnatural silence of the clearing. "I am what remains when love consumes itself," the figure replied. "I am what waits at the end of eternity. I am the truth he fears to face." What truth? Isolde's heart pounded, a sound like drums in the stillness. The figure smiled, lips parting to reveal teeth too sharp for comfort. "Find me," it said. "Find me in the red grove where the thorns sing and the earth remembers. Find me before the moon turns its face away." Where? Isolde asked, desperate now. Where is this place? But the figure was already fading, the clearing dissolving around her, the trees melting back into darkness. The last thing she saw was a hand reaching toward her, palm upturned, revealing a small black thorn that gleamed like obsidian. Follow the thorns, the voice whispered as the dream slipped away. They remember the way, even if you do not. Isolde woke with a gasp, sitting upright in her bed, the sheets tangled around her legs. The room was dark except for the faint glow of embers in the fireplace, but even in that dim light, she could see that something was different. On her pillow lay a single black rose, its stem bristling with thorns, its petals open to reveal a centre dark as night. Beneath it, a folded piece of parchment, sealed with wax the colour of freshly spilled blood. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, breaking the seal with a soft crack that seemed too loud in the silence of her chambers. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, nothing like Cassian's crisp, precise script. She waits in the red grove. Follow the western path until the trees begin to weep. Come before the moon forgets your name. Isolde stared at the note, reading it again and again, as if repetition might reveal hidden meanings. Who had left it? How had they entered her chambers, when Cassian had sworn they were protected by the strongest wards in the castle? And more importantly, who was waiting for her in the Red Grove, and what truths could they reveal that Cassian could, or would not? She knew she should tell him about the note, about the dream. But something held her back, the memory of his face on the balcony at the winter gala, the way he had almost kissed her and then withdrawn, retreating behind walls of formality and reserve. For days since their return he had been more distant than ever, as if that moment of near surrender had frightened him more than any physical threat. No, she decided, slipping the note beneath her mattress. This was something she needed to pursue alone. A truth meant for her, and, perhaps, in the learning of it, a weapon against the shadows that haunted Cassian's eyes. Finding a way out of the castle proved more challenging than Isolde had anticipated. Cassian had made it clear after the attack that she was not to leave the castle grounds without escort, preferably his own. Though, in his absence, a contingent of guards would suffice. The gates were watched, the walls patrolled, the few unguarded exits sealed with magic that would alert him immediately if breached. For 2 days, Isolde observed, learning the patterns of the guards, noting when shifts changed and where blind spots might exist. She explored the lesser-used corridors of the East Wing, discovering a servants' passage that led to the kitchens, and from there, a door that opened onto a small courtyard used for deliveries. But even that door was guarded, and she had no illusions about her ability to overpower or outrun a vampire sentry. On the 3rd night after receiving the note, Isolde was on the verge of giving up, of accepting that she might have to confide in Cassian after all, when fate, or perhaps something far more deliberate, intervened. She was returning to her chambers from the library, a volume of ancient folklore tucked under her arm, when she noticed something strange. The corridor was empty, not unusual at this late hour, but more than empty. It felt abandoned, as if the very stones had forgotten they were part of a castle inhabited by hundreds of immortal beings. And then she saw it. A door in the wall where no door had been before, its wood dark and weathered, a pattern of thorns carved into its surface. Isolde hesitated, glancing up and down the corridor to ensure she was truly alone. Then, heart-pounding, she approached the door, running her fingers over the carved thorns. They seemed to move beneath her touch, shifting like living things, opening a path to the center of the design. The door swung open silently, revealing a narrow passage lit by a soft, reddish glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. It was a trap. It had to be. No mysterious door appearing from nowhere could lead to anything but danger. And yet, the thorns in her dream had guided her. The note had promised answers, and something deep within her, some instinct beyond reason, urged her forward. Drawing a deep breath, Isolde stepped through the doorway, half expecting to find herself in some dungeon or otherworldly realm. Instead, the passage led down a spiral staircase that seemed to descend far deeper than should have been possible, finally opening onto a tunnel that smelled of damp earth and growing things, a scent that seemed out of place in the sterile, stone-bound world of Valenhart Castle. The tunnel stretched before her, curving gently, the reddish light growing stronger as she proceeded. After what felt like hours but might have been minutes, time seemed fluid here. Unreliable, she saw an opening ahead, a circle of night sky visible through an archway of stone. Isolde emerged into the forest at the base of the mountain, far from the castle gates, beyond the walls and wards that should have prevented her escape. The door behind her had vanished, the tunnel with it, leaving only a smooth expanse of rock face that gave no hint of the passage she had just traversed. The night was cold, the sky clear and pricked with stars that seemed closer and brighter than she remembered. 3/4 of a moon hung low over the treetops, not quite full but waning. "Before the moon forgets your name," the note had said. She had little time. Wrapping her cloak more tightly around her shoulders, Isolde oriented herself using the castle looming on the mountainside above and began walking west into the heart of the forest. The Blackwood, as the locals called it, lived up to its name. The trees were ancient giants, their trunks so massive that 10 men could not have linked arms around them, their bark so dark it seemed to absorb what little moonlight filtered through the canopy. The forest floor was carpeted with moss the colour of midnight, interrupted occasionally by pale mushrooms that glowed with an eerie blue luminescence. Isolde had heard whispers among the servants about the Blackwood, that it was haunted by the spirits of those who had died at vampire hands, that creatures older than the vampires themselves made their homes in its depths, that even immortals approached its heart with caution. But the path she followed seemed strangely welcoming, almost eager for her presence. The underbrush parted before her steps, thorny vines drawing back rather than catching at her cloak, branches lifting to allow her passage where they might have blocked another traveller. They remember the way, even if you do not. The deeper she ventured into the forest, the more certain she became that she was being guided, not just by the path, but by some presence that watched from the shadows between the trees, that whispered just beyond the range of hearing, that wanted her to reach her destination as much as she herself did. And then she saw it, the first tree with blood-red sap oozing from a wound in its trunk, as if something with claws had scored the bark deeply enough to reach the living tissue beneath. The sap gleamed wetly in the moonlight, thick and viscous, dripping slowly to pool at the base of the tree. Another such tree appeared a few yards ahead, and another beyond that, marking a path that curved away from the main trail, leading deeper into the forest. Isolde followed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The bleeding trees became more numerous as she proceeded, until she found herself in a grove where every trunk wept scarlet tears, where the moss beneath her feet was stained with crimson, where the air itself seemed to pulse with a slow, rhythmic beat, like a massive heart. The Red Grove. She had found it. At the centre of the grove stood a structure that defied easy description. Not quite a house, not quite a shrine, but something that incorporated elements of both. It appeared to be grown rather than built, its walls formed from living trees that had been bent and shaped over decades or perhaps centuries, their branches woven together to create a dome overhead. Thorny vines wrapped around the trunks, blooming with flowers the colour of garnets, their perfumes sweet, but with an underlying metallic note that reminded Isolde of blood. A soft light glowed from within the structure, filtering through gaps in the woven branches, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. Isolde hesitated at the edge of the clearing, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what she was doing. She had left the relative safety of the castle, ventured into forbidden territory, followed a dream and a mysterious note to this place that radiated ancient power. For what? Answers that Cassian might have given her himself if she had pressed hard enough? But no, that wasn't true. Cassian guarded his secrets jealously, revealing only what circumstances forced him to acknowledge. He had not told her about his mother until politics made it necessary. He had not explained the true nature of the feeding until she experienced it firsthand. He had almost kissed her, had admitted to caring for her more than was safe, and then had withdrawn completely, as if even that small confession had been too great a risk. No, she would not learn the truth from Cassian. Not all of it. Not willingly given. If she wanted to understand what bound them together, what dangers they faced, what future might be possible, she would have to seek that knowledge herself. Drawing a deep breath, Isolde stepped into the clearing and approached the living structure. "Hello," she called, her voice sounding small and uncertain in the unnatural stillness of the grove. "Is someone here? I received your note." For a long moment there was no response. Then the vines around the entrance parted, drawing back like curtains to reveal a woman standing in the doorway. A woman unlike any Isolde had ever seen. She was tall, her posture straight as a blade, her body wrapped in layers of fabric that seemed to shift colour with every movement, now black, now crimson, now the deep purple of a bruise. Her hair was a riot of dark curls streaked with silver, falling unbound to her waist, but it was her face that truly captured attention. A face of sharp angles and perfect symmetry, neither young nor old, but somehow both at once, with eyes the colour of embers banked in ash, smouldering with inner fire. Not human, Isolde realised immediately, but not vampire either. Something else. "Isolde Marin," the woman said, her voice rich and resonant, like bells rung in a deep cavern. "You took your time in coming." "I came as soon as I found a way out of the castle," Isolde replied, lifting her chin slightly. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" The woman smiled, revealing teeth that were white and even but slightly pointed, like those of a predator. "I am Virel," she said, "once courtier to the Valenhart dynasty. Now, something less official but far more necessary." She gestured toward the interior of her strange dwelling. "Come inside, mortal daughter. The night grows cold, and we have much to discuss." Isolde hesitated only briefly before following Virel into the living structure. The interior was larger than it had appeared from outside, a single circular chamber with a floor of packed earth covered in woven rugs of intricate design. The walls pulsed gently, as if the trees themselves were breathing, and the light came from orbs of glass suspended from the branches overhead, each containing what looked like fireflies but larger, their luminescence steady rather than flickering. At the centre of the chamber was a table of polished wood, its surface inlaid with patterns of silver and bone that formed symbols Isolde didn't recognise. Around it cushions were arranged for sitting, their fabrics rich and varied in texture and colour. "Sit," Virel commanded, gesturing to a cushion of deep burgundy velvet. "Would you take tea? Wine? Something stronger, perhaps?" "Nothing, thank you," Isolde replied, settling onto the cushion, her back straight, hands folded in her lap to hide their slight trembling. "I came for answers, not refreshment." Virel's ember eyes gleamed with what might have been approval. "Direct," she observed. "Good. There is no time for the dance of pleasantries." She seated herself opposite Isolde, arranging her flowing garments with graceful efficiency. "What do you wish to know, Isolde Marin? What brought you from the safe confines of vampire protection into my domain?" "Your note did," Isolde said, "and a dream of thorns and blood." "Ah, but the dream and note were merely the means," Virel countered. "The motivation came from within you, from questions unanswered, from half-truths that no longer satisfy, from the growing awareness that you are caught in currents far deeper than you initially perceived." It was true, and hearing it spoken so plainly made Isolde's stomach tighten with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Yes," she admitted. I need to understand what's happening to me. To us. Cassian and I. Virel nodded slowly. The bond, she said. You feel it growing, changing, becoming something neither of you anticipated or fully comprehend. Yes. Isolde leaned forward slightly. What is it? He said it was just biology, chemistry, a survival mechanism to ensure feeding. But it feels like more than that. Of course it does, Virel said with a dismissive wave of her hand, because it is more. Much more. But to understand the nature of the bond, you must first understand the nature of the bonded, particularly the prince who has claimed you. Then tell me, Isolde urged. Who is he? What is he, beyond the mask he presents to the world? Virel's expression grew solemn. Cassian Valenhart is many things, she said. Prince, heir, diplomat, warrior. But above all, he is cursed, has been since childhood, though few know the true nature of the curse, or the price it extracts. A chill ran down Isolde's spine. Cursed? How? By whom? By his father, Virel replied, her voice hardening. Though not intentionally, at least, not as the curse manifested. Renatus sought only to ensure his son's loyalty, to bind him to the Valenhart line with ties that could never be severed. But curses, like all-powerful magic, have a way of finding the path of greatest pain. She rose gracefully, moving to a shelf carved into the living wall of the structure, where bottles and jars of various sizes were arranged. Selecting one, a crystal vial filled with liquid the color of rubies, she returned to the table. To truly understand, she said, you must see. Words alone cannot convey the weight of centuries, the burden of knowledge too terrible to bear alone. She uncorked the vial, pouring a single drop of its contents into a shallow silver dish that Isolde hadn't noticed before. The liquid spread, thin as water but gleaming like polished metal. Look, Virel commanded, gesturing to the dish. Look and know what shaped the prince who now shapes your destiny. Isolde hesitated, uncertain whether to trust this strange woman with her ember eyes and knife-edge smile. But the need for answers overcame caution, and she leaned forward, gazing into the silvery surface of the liquid. At first, she saw only her own reflection, distorted by ripples that seemed to move without cause. Then the surface cleared, and she was looking not at herself, but at a scene from long ago, a grand chamber in what she recognized as Valenhart Castle, though the furnishings were different, more ornate, belonging to an earlier era. A boy stood before a massive throne of black stone, his head bowed, his slender body trembling slightly, though he was clearly trying to maintain composure. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13 in human years, though with vampires, physical appearance was an unreliable indicator of true age. But even without being told, Isolde knew who he was. The garnet eyes, the proud set of his shoulders even in submission, the features that would mature into the face she now knew so well. This was Cassian, centuries ago, still more child than man. Before him on the throne sat King Renatus, looking much as he did now, immortality having preserved him in the prime of his power. But his expression was different, softer somehow, almost sad as he gazed at the boy before him. It must be done, my son, Renatus was saying, his voice echoing strangely, as if coming from a great distance. The ritual will bind you to our bloodline, ensure your loyalty to the throne beyond any possibility of betrayal. It is the way it has always been, for all heirs to the Valenhart line. I would never betray you, father, young Cassian replied, his voice higher than the one Isolde knew, but with the same careful precision. My loyalty is yours by birth, by blood, by choice. Perhaps now, Renatus acknowledged, but eternity is long, Cassian, and power creates its own ambitions. This ritual is not about who you are today, but who you might become in centuries to come. He gestured, and figures moved from the shadows at the edges of the chamber, vampires in robes of deepest black, their faces hidden by hoods, their hands bearing implements of silver and crystal that gleamed ominously in the torchlight. "The binding of the air," Renatus intoned formally, "as it was done to me, and to my father before me, and to all Valenheart princes since the founding of our line." Young Cassian straightened his shoulders, lifting his chin in a gesture of courage that made Isolde's heart ache. "I am ready, father." What followed was a ritual of terrible beauty and greater cruelty. The robed figures surrounded Cassian, chanting in a language that seemed to crawl through the air like living things. Silver blades cut intricate patterns into his skin, not deep enough to cause serious harm, but precisely placed to create symbols of binding and obedience. Crystal vials collected the blood that flowed from these wounds, mixing it with other substances, herbs, powders, liquids that steamed when combined. The mixture was then returned to him, poured over the cuts, seeping into his flesh as the chanting grew more intense. Through it all, Cassian remained silent, though his face betrayed the pain he endured. Eyes squeezed shut, jaw clenched tight, small tremors running through his body. But he did not cry out, did not beg for mercy or release. Even then, his control was formidable. The ritual reached its climax as Renatus himself rose from the throne, approaching his son with a goblet of dark liquid. "Drink," he commanded. "Drink, and be bound to the throne, to the bloodline, to your destiny as heir to Valenheart." Cassian took the goblet with hands that shook slightly, raised it to his lips and drank deeply. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his body convulsed, his back arching, the goblet falling from his hands to shatter on the stone floor. A scream tore from his throat, a sound of such agony that Isolde flinched, tears springing to her eyes, though she knew this was a scene from centuries past, that the boy before her had survived to become the man she knew. But as Cassian collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain, something unexpected happened. A light began to emanate from his chest, a soft silver glow that pulsed with the rhythm of his heart. It grew stronger, brighter, until it seemed to consume him entirely, his body becoming a vessel for living light. The robed figures drew back, their chanting faltering. Renatus stared in shock, his expression shifting from surprise to dawning horror. "What is happening?" he demanded, turning to the tallest of the robed figures. "This is not part of the ritual." The figure lowered its hood, revealing a face Isolde recognized with a jolt of shock. Virel, looking much as she did now, those ember eyes fixed on the glowing form of the young prince. "The ritual interacts with what lies within the subject," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding before her. "Your son carries something unexpected, my king. Something the binding magic has awakened rather than subdued." "What?" Renatus pressed, his composure slipping to reveal fear beneath. "What does he carry?" Virel's expression was grave. "A soul, my king. A true soul. Not merely the echo most vampires retain. And souls cannot be bound. They can only be freely given or tragically lost." As if in response to her words, the light surrounding Cassian began to coalesce, gathering itself into a sphere above his chest. For a moment it hovered there, pulsing like a second heart. Then, with a sound like crystal shattering, it exploded outward, sending shockwaves through the chamber that knocked all present to the ground. When the light faded, Cassian lay unconscious on the stone floor, his breathing shallow but steady. The symbols cut into his skin had changed, the precise patterns now altered, twisted into new forms that seemed to writhe against his flesh. "What has happened?" Renatus demanded, rising to his feet, his face a mask of fury and fear. "What has he become?" Virel moved to the boy's side, placing a hand on his forehead, her expression somber. "The ritual succeeded, my king," she said after a moment. "He is bound to the Valenheart line, to the throne, to his duty as heir. But the binding has transformed, become something new." "Explain," Renatus commanded. The ritual binds through limitation, restricting choice, constraining will, channeling loyalty, Varel said, her voice taking on the cadence of formal prophecy. But in a being with a true soul, such constraints create consequences, reflections, equal and opposite reactions. She looked up at the king, her ember eyes burning brighter now. Your son will serve, will obey, will uphold the Valenhart line as all heirs before him. But the price of this service has changed. Where the bound princes of the past surrendered only their freedom of allegiance, Cassian will surrender something far more precious. What? Renatus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His capacity to love, Varel replied, her gaze returning to the unconscious boy. Any mortal he truly loves will die, consumed by the very bond that makes their connection possible. And with each such death, a piece of his soul will be torn away, fed to the binding that holds him to the throne. Renatus's face drained of what little colour it possessed. No, he whispered. I never intended. Intentions matter little in magic of this magnitude, Varel cut him off. The deed is done. The price is set. Your son is bound as you wished, but the chains are heavier than you knew. The scene in the silver liquid began to fade, the images becoming indistinct, dissolving back into reflective nothingness. Isolde sat back, her heart pounding, her mind racing to process what she had witnessed. Is it true? She asked, her voice hardly more than a whisper. Is he truly cursed to lose anyone he loves? Varel's expression was solemn. Yes, she said simply. The curse has claimed 3 lives already, 3 mortal women he allowed himself to care for, each death more painful than the last. After the 3rd, he swore never to form such attachments again, to keep himself separate, isolated, protected by walls of ice and duty. But then why? Isolde began, then stopped, a terrible suspicion forming in her mind. Why choose me? Why bind me to him if he knows what will happen? Perhaps he believed himself incapable of love after so long, Varel suggested. Or perhaps he thought the binding ritual would be protection enough, that by making you his official consort, by following the formal protocols of vampire society, he could maintain the necessary emotional distance. She leaned forward, her ember eyes fixed on Isolde's face. But you changed that, didn't you? You with your courage, your defiance, your refusal to be merely what tradition demanded. You made him feel, made him care, made him break his own rules of self-preservation. Isolde thought of their interactions, of how Cassian had moved from cold detachment to reluctant acknowledgement to something approaching tenderness, of how he had fared from her to save her life, how he had danced with her at the gala, how he had almost kissed her on the balcony before pulling away. More than is safe, for either of us. Now she understood what he had meant. The feeding, she said, remembering the intensity of that connection, the flood of memories that had passed between them. It accelerated the process, didn't it? Strengthened a bond that was already forming. Yes, Varel agreed. The feeding is always intimate, always creates connection. But between a vampire and the mortal, they genuinely care for. It is transformative. It binds your life forces together in ways that transcend the physical. Each time he feeds from you, the bond grows stronger, and the curse tightens its grip. Isolde's mind raced, searching for solutions, for loopholes, for any way to escape the tragic fate that seemed inevitable. There must be a way to break the curse, she insisted. Some counterspell, some ritual, some price that could be paid. Varel's expression was unreadable. There is always a price that can be paid, she said carefully. But often it is higher than those involved are willing to consider. Tell me, Isolde demanded. Whatever it is, I need to know. Are you certain? Varel asked, her voice dropping to something near a whisper. Knowledge of this kind cannot be unlearned. Once given, it will change how you see him, how you see yourself, how you understand the bond between you. I'm certain, Isolde said firmly. I need to know if what I feel, what we feel, is real, or just the effect of the binding, the feeding, the curse itself. Virel studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her worthiness, her strength, her capacity to bear the burden of such knowledge. Then, apparently satisfied with what she saw, she reached into the folds of her shifting garments and withdrew a ring. It was beautiful in a terrible way, a band of what appeared to be black iron, twisted into the shape of thorns that curved inward, their tips meeting at the centre where a small, clear crystal was set. This, Virel said, holding the ring out to Isolde, is a truth thorn. Forged from iron taken from the heart of a star, quenched in the tears of a truth-seer, and bound with spells older than vampire kind. When worn, it reveals deception, not through words or signals that others might detect, but through pain that only the wearer will feel. She placed the ring in Isolde's palm, where it sat heavy and cold, the thorns seeming to shift slightly against her skin. When Cassian speaks truth to you, the ring will remain as it is now. But when he lies, whether through direct falsehood or omission of crucial truth, the thorns will turn inward, drawing blood from your finger. Not enough to cause lasting harm, but sufficient to serve as warning. Isolde stared at the ring, understanding its value and its danger. With it, she could know with certainty what was real and what was manipulation, what was genuine feeling and what was the influence of magic neither of them fully understood. "And the curse?" she asked, closing her fingers around the ring. "Can it be broken?" Virel's expression grew somber. "Yes," she said, "but not easily, and not without sacrifice. The curse binds Cassian to the throne through the denial of genuine love. To break it would require severing that connection, releasing him from his duty, his position, his very identity as heir to Valenheart." "How?" Isolde pressed. "How could that be done?" "There are 3 paths," Virel said, her voice taking on the cadence of formal prophecy once more. "First, the death of the king by the heir's hand, patricide, the ultimate breaking of the bonds of blood and loyalty. Second, the willing sacrifice of a mortal loved one, freely choosing death to purchase the prince's freedom. Or third—" She hesitated, her ember eyes flickering with something like reluctance. "Third, the transformation of the heir himself, neither vampire nor mortal, but something new, something that exists outside the bindings of either state, a being beyond the reach of the curse's magic." "Transformation into what?" Isolde asked, her mind racing with possibilities, with implications. "That," Virel said, rising to her feet in a whisper of shifting fabric, "is knowledge for another time, when choices have narrowed and paths have become clearer. For now, take the ring. Use it wisely. Learn what is true in your bond with the prince, and what is the working of magic beyond your control." She moved toward the entrance of the living structure, parting the vines with a gesture. "Dawn approaches," she said. "You must return to the castle before your absence is discovered. The path will guide you. The trees remember the way, even if you do not." Isolde stood, tucking the ring carefully into a hidden pocket of her gown. "Thank you," she said, though the words seemed inadequate for what she had learned, for the tools she had been given to navigate the dangerous waters ahead. Virel's expression softened slightly, something like compassion flickering in those ember eyes. "I have served the Valenheart line for centuries," she said. "Watched princes rise and fall, seen consorts come and go, some to death, some to transformation, some to fates perhaps worse than either. But you—" She reached out, her fingers cool as they brushed Isolde's cheek. "You are different, Isolde Marin. You carry a strength the others lacked, a fire they could not sustain. You might be the one to break the pattern, to offer Cassian something beyond the endless cycle of duty and loss, and hardening against the next inevitable pain." "I hope so," Isolde said softly. For both our sakes. Varel nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps respect. Go, she said. And remember, the ring reveals truth, but what you do with that knowledge is yours to decide. Choose wisely, mortal daughter. The fate of more than one soul rests in your hands. The journey back to Valenhart Castle seemed both longer and shorter than the outward path. Longer because Isolde's mind was so full of what she had learned. Shorter because the forest seemed to bend around her, compressing distance to ensure her timely return. The sky was beginning to lighten from black to deepest indigo as she reached the base of the mountain where the castle perched. The door in the rock face had reappeared, standing open as if expecting her, the reddish glow of the passage beyond beckoning her inside. Isolde slipped through, the door closing silently behind her. The passage led her upward, spiraling through the heart of the mountain, until she emerged once more in the corridor outside her chambers, a corridor that now appeared perfectly normal, with no sign of the mysterious door that had facilitated her escape. Her room was dark and silent as she entered. The fire burned down to embers, the bed still rumpled from her hasty departure hours earlier. The black rose that had accompanied the note was gone, whether taken by whoever had delivered it or simply vanished of its own accord, she couldn't be sure. Isolde moved to her dressing table, lighting a single candle to see by as she removed the thorn ring from her pocket. It gleamed in the candlelight, the crystal at its center catching and refracting the flame into tiny fragments of rainbow. After a moment's hesitation, she slipped it onto the middle finger of her right hand. It fit perfectly, as if made for her, the thorns pressing against her skin but not breaking it. The crystal remained clear, dormant, waiting for the moment it would be needed. A sound from behind her made her turn sharply, a soft click, like a door being carefully unlocked. Her heart pounded as the hidden passage behind the tapestry opened, revealing Cassian standing in the shadows, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You left the castle," he said without preamble, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of tension that raised the hair on the back of her neck. "Beyond the wards, beyond my protection." Isolde squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "Yes," she admitted, seeing no point in denial. "I needed answers you wouldn't give me." "And did you find them?" he asked, stepping fully into the room, the passage sealing itself behind him. "These answers you sought so desperately that you risked your safety to obtain them?" The candlelight caught the garnet of his eyes, making them glow like banked coals. He was dressed simply by his standards. A shirt of black silk open at the throat, trousers of the same material, boots that reached his knees. His hair was loose around his shoulders, as if he had been preparing for rest when something, her absence perhaps, or some magical alarm triggered by her return, had drawn him to her chambers. "Yes," she said again, resisting the urge to hide her right hand, to conceal the ring that now adorned it. "I met Varel in the Red Grove. She showed me. She told me about the ritual, about the curse." Cassian went very still, his expression freezing into a mask of perfect control. "Varel," he repeated, the name laden with complex emotions. Anger, respect, perhaps even fear. The exiled seer. The witch of the Thorns. "And what exactly did she tell you about this curse?" Isolde's right hand tingled slightly, the thorns of the ring pressing more firmly against her skin, though not yet drawing blood. A warning, perhaps, that half-truths approached dangerous territory. "That you were bound to the throne through a ritual meant to ensure your loyalty," she said, watching his face carefully. "That something went wrong, or perhaps right in an unexpected way. That the binding interacted with your soul, creating a curse that makes it dangerous for you to love." She took a step toward him, emboldened by the knowledge she now possessed. "That any mortal you truly love will die, consumed by the very bond that connects you. And that with each such death, a piece of your soul is torn away, fed to the binding that holds you to the Valenhart throne." Cassian's control slipped for just an instant, revealing shock and something that might have been grief before the mask descended once more. "Virel always did have a flair for the dramatic," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "She speaks in half-truths and prophecies designed to create exactly the emotional response she desires." The thorns of the ring pressed harder, pricking Isolde's skin with tiny points of pain, though not yet breaking through. Another warning stronger this time. "Is she wrong?" Isolde challenged. "Is what she showed me, what she told me, untrue?" Cassian was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers, his expression giving nothing away. Then, with a slight shift of his shoulders, a surrender so subtle it might have been missed by anyone less attuned to his body language, he sighed. "No," he admitted. "Not in essence. But the truth is more complex than even Virel understands." The pressure from the ring eased immediately, confirming his honesty. "Then explain it to me," Isolde said, taking another step toward him. "The full truth, Cassian. No more half measures, no more careful omissions. If we are bound together, if my life is tied to yours through whatever this is between us, I deserve to know exactly what that means." He studied her for another long moment, as if weighing options, calculating risks, determining how much to reveal. Then his shoulders dropped slightly, a gesture of resignation. "Very well," he said quietly. "The full truth. But not here, not standing in the cold with dawn approaching. Come, sit by the fire. This is a conversation that requires comfort, at least of the physical kind, since emotional comfort is beyond what either of us can expect." He moved to the fireplace, kneeling to add logs to the dying embers, coaxing the flames back to life with practiced ease. Isolde settled in one of the chairs flanking the hearth, watching him work, noting the grace of his movements, the careful precision with which he arranged the wood, the way the firelight caught in his hair, turning the black to midnight blue. When the fire was burning steadily, Cassian took the chair opposite hers, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, watchful. "What do you want to know first?" he asked. "There is much ground to cover, and some paths are darker than others." Isolde considered her options, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind since Virel's revelation. "Is what I feel for you real?" she asked. "Or is it just the effect of the binding, the feeding, the magic that connects us?" Cassian's expression softened slightly, something like regret flickering in his eyes. "That," he said gently, "is the one question I cannot answer for you. I don't know. I'm not sure anyone could know with certainty where genuine feeling ends and magical influence begins. The two are," he gestured vaguely, searching for words, "intertwined, inseparable perhaps." The ring remained neutral, neither pressing nor easing, a sign Isolde supposed that he was speaking his truth as he understood it. "But your feelings," she pressed, "are they real? Or are you just responding to the bond, to the curse, to whatever magic binds us together?" Now a ghost of a smile touched his lips, fleeting but genuine. "After centuries of existence," he said, "I have learned to recognize my own emotions, to separate them from external influences. What I feel for you is—" He paused, choosing his words with careful precision. "Real, unexpected, unwelcome, in many ways, given the potential consequences, but undeniably genuine." Again, the ring remained neutral, confirming his sincerity. "And what exactly do you feel?" Isolde asked, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it from across the hearth. Cassian held her gaze, his own steady and unwavering. "Concern," he said, "admiration, respect, desire." He paused, then added even more softly, "Care that could become more, if I allowed it. If circumstances were different, if the curse did not hang over us like a sword waiting to fall." Isolde absorbed this, the ring's continued neutrality assuring her of his honesty. "And if I told you I'm willing to risk the sword?" she asked. that I want to explore what this could be, curse or no curse. His expression darkened. Then I would tell you that you don't understand what you're risking, he said, an edge entering his voice. You saw what happened to 3 others who made that choice. 3 women who believed love could overcome a curse written in blood and bound with magic older than either of us can comprehend. But what if there's a way to break the curse? Isolde suggested, leaning forward in her chair. Virel mentioned 3 paths. I know what Virel believes, Cassian interrupted, his tone hardening. Patricide, sacrifice, transformation. 3 paths, each darker than the last, each requiring a price too high to contemplate. But if one of them could free you, at what cost? He demanded, rising suddenly from his chair to pace before the fire, his movements tightly controlled despite the emotion evident in his voice. Should I kill my father, the king, betraying not just him, but centuries of loyalty to the crown? Should I accept the sacrifice of someone who matters to me, living with that guilt for all eternity? Or should I transform into something not vampire, not mortal, but a hybrid creature that exists in the shadows between, never truly belonging to either world? He stopped, turning to face her, his expression fierce with an intensity that took her breath away. No, he said firmly, I will not pay those prices, and I will not allow you to pay them either. The ring remained neutral. He believed what he was saying, believed it absolutely. Then what? Isolde asked, rising to face him. We just pretend there's nothing between us? Maintain the formal relationship of prince and consort while ignoring what we both feel? For how long, Cassian? Decades? Centuries? Until I grow old and die naturally, if the curse even allows that. His face softened slightly, pain replacing anger in his eyes. I don't know, he admitted. I have been surviving day by day, moment by moment, making decisions as they become necessary, rather than planning for a future I cannot predict and dare not hope for. He moved toward her, stopping just short of touching distance, his restraint evident in the tension of his body. What I do know is that I will not risk you, he said, his voice low and intense. Not for my freedom, not for my happiness, not even for the chance to break a curse I have borne for centuries. The ring remained absolutely still, confirming the depth of his commitment to her safety. Isolde felt tears gathering in her eyes, though whether from frustration or being moved by his declaration, she couldn't say. And if I decide the risk is mine to take, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, if I choose to pursue this connection, knowing the potential cost? Cassian's expression was a complex mixture of tenderness and sorrow. Then I would have to be stronger than both of us, he said softly. Strong enough to maintain the distance necessary to keep you alive, even if that means denying what we both want. He lifted a hand as if to touch her face, then let it fall back to his side, the gesture eloquent in its restraint. I have lost too many to this curse already, Isolde. I cannot, will not, add you to that number, even if it means living with this hunger, this longing, this constant awareness of what might have been in a world where I was not bound to duty and throne and the consequences of ancient magic. The ring remained neutral, validating every word. Isolde absorbed this, understanding at last the full complexity of their situation, the genuine feelings on both sides, the real danger of the curse, the impossible choices they faced. There were no easy answers, no simple solutions, only difficult paths forward, each with its own risks and sacrifices. What happens now? She asked finally, when the silence between them had stretched to near breaking. Where do we go from here? Cassian's mouth curved in a sad, almost smile. Now, he said, we continue as we have been. Prince and consort in the eyes of the court, careful allies in private. We navigate the political waters of vampire society together. We maintain the appearance necessary to satisfy tradition and expectation. And we He hesitated, then finished softly. We try not to shatter under the weight of what cannot be. It wasn't enough. Nowhere near enough to satisfy the longing that had grown between them. But it was honest, and for now perhaps that was all they could hope for. All right, Isolde said, offering her own sad smile in return. For now. Until we find another way. For the briefest moment, the thorns of the ring pressed against her skin. Not painfully, just enough to register. A warning, perhaps, that hope itself might be a form of self-deception in the face of a curse designed to deny exactly what they both wanted most. But if Cassian noticed her slight wince, he gave no sign, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that spoke of feelings too deep for safety, too powerful to be denied forever, no matter what ancient magic demanded. And in that moment, despite everything they had discussed, everything she had learned, Isolde knew with absolute certainty that she would find a way to break the curse, not just for her own happiness, but for his freedom from a burden no one should have to bear for eternity. The ring remained still, confirming that at least in this, her determination was as real as the danger they faced.